Check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, beautiful people? Welcome to another edition of J4 Conversations. Hope you guys are having a beautiful Sunday, that your Sunday ritual was nice, your coffee was right, the sip was tasting the way it needs to taste, your house is clean, and your music was playing, and that you've had a great day, and that if you're watching football, your favorite team is winning. Welcome to J4 Conversations. I am AJ, your moderator. Very glad to be here with you all today to continue our conversation around raising beautiful Black and biracial children. That is the purpose of the channel, is to be a resource, an aid, a guide, a sounding board for mothers and fathers raising beautiful children in the modern era, a era that is vastly different coming of age during my time. And we have Brother Mulatto Vanguard in the house. Hope you're doing well, brother. Hope your Sunday's good. I see you're putting out content regularly there. As content creators, we have to be persistent and consistent, even if we get discouraged. So, brother, welcome. If y'all are interested in biracial subject matter, definitely head over there to Mulatto Vanguard's page and check him out. Today, we're going to be revisiting some of the criteria I talked about for what would it take for a biracial community to immerse and assert itself as a cultural community, just from my own musings as to what it would take, to what criteria would need to be in place. This is not scholarly. This is simply the old man reflecting and musing around a subject matter that I did not really know had momentum until about 6 months ago. I did a show called White Mothers and Their Biracial Black Sons. It went viral. And in the reaction, a lot of commentary from black folk, monoracial, beautiful black folks saying biracials ain't black. I was like, what? What? And then slowly but surely on the heels of that, biracial folks were getting into the space saying, yeah, we ain't black for a whole bunch of different reasons, that we choose to honor both love sources in declaration, life lived, and intentionality. And I was like, my goodness. You know, I'm a biracial kid. My mother's from France, from Europe. My father is a Creole cat brother from New Orleans by way of Gary, Indiana. I was born in 1968, and my pathway into a group identity was through blackness. And so today I am black identifying, although I am being enlightened and educated around this new, beautiful assertion community of mixed race kids and biracial kids who are asking very, very legitimate kinds of questions. All right, so today, welcome. I see we have a few folks in here. As always, if you're interested in sort of letting me know, or the community here know, what your particular interest in the subject matter is, parenting beautiful black children or biracial children, then let that be known. If you are a parent of biracial children, would love to know that. And if you're just here kind of because the subject matter appeals to you, welcome. All right. So today, ultimately, I'm going to conclude by reviewing a study. So you'll have scientists, researchers, academicians who will do a major study, longitudinal, whatever the case may be, peer reviewed. And then down the road, you might have other people who will review the study. Okay. So this is a review of a study called Not Quite Monoracial: Biracial Stereotypes Explored in the Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin. So if you're interested in learning more about that, the link is in the description. So this is a very short synopsis around what they found in the study around biracial stereotypes, with a particular focus around black-white heritage configurations. And so I'm exploring as to whether or not this would fit as an additional criteria in my own musings, again, not formal, not scholarly, not peer-reviewed, and actually what would it take? What criteria might it take for a biracial community, particularly a black-white biracial community, to assert itself as an emerging sociological, anthropological culture, right? We're at the dawn of that. It's fascinating to me. So today, I'm going to go over the criteria very briefly, just so you get a sense of being on the same page with me. And then I'm going to introduce the recent findings on black-white stereotypes. And then we'll open it up to the floor for feedback on the topic. Intermittently throughout, feel free to offer comments or questions or clarifications, disagreements, whatever is on your spirit and heart. And I'll definitely put those up here should they make sense. And then afterwards, if there's time and interest, we can open it up to broader conversations, questions, perspectives, whatever the case may be. So fair enough? All right. So today, your role is to like and to comment. Y'all like the subscription there. Excuse me, like the YouTube, click there and comment as you see appropriate. Our goal for today, and we've met our previous goals, for those of you who are not subscribed but listening in and see value in the content, our goal today, beautiful family, are 4 subscribers. For folks who have listened in but perhaps haven't taken that particular click just yet. So welcome. Without further ado or delay, let me pull up the criteria. Hope you guys are doing good. All right. So in a graphic format here, in terms of biracial identity formation, or to be more concise, people identify as they want to identify. That doesn't require any sanction, external entities' approval, or any kind of entity, government, or otherwise to tell you what you are. You would determine that for yourself. As I mentioned, I'm a biracial cat by birth, but culturally I've always moved and grooved and aligned myself primarily within a Black aesthetic, a Black space, a Black rhetoric, a Black life lived, a Black family, Black work, and that has given me meaning, purpose, and structure. Okay, but I recognize that today is a different generation, especially for young parents. Parents are averaging having their first children around 27, 28 years old. That means you were born roughly 30 years ago, and I have 24 years of additional age on you, and the generation is about 25 years. So I realize folks having children now are of a complete new generation dealing with new circumstances and societal issues. And so this is valuable to you as parents, particularly interracial marriages producing beautiful biracial children, because as you navigate the growth process, the rearing, the raising of your children, it's helpful to understand what they're going to engage and experience in the broader society. And so right now, there isn't a distinct cultural designation for mulatto or biracial. And so this is just my musings, y'all, just my musings on what criteria might need to be in place. So very briefly, in order to have a distinctive culture, you got to have a distinctive designation. There's some semblance of that in the broader society. The 2000 U.S. Census was an active agency on the part of biracial children, I would imagine, activists, academicians, perhaps interracial couples that were saying identity is changing and we need to recognize the complexity, the layers of identity. And there was this campaigning or lobbying on the part of the public to ensure that there was 2 or more races as something to check on the U.S. Census. There's always been some sense of racial designation since the census's inception, but in a way that came from the people arguing outward that we need to have the capacity to designate. Now, I know there's current conversations going on in the space about what to call themselves specifically. I think that's a separate conversation from the census, but a way to designate yourself, to capture data that you can then extrapolate across multitude of variables so that you can then tell your story. You can tell your story as a monoracial community. You can tell your story as a biracial community. And if you see variance in outcomes across multiple variables, it lets you know that there's some distinction there for a host of different reasons and can ultimately set forth a plan for problem solving. All right. The other dynamic is mass. When I was born in 1970, the earliest data set that I saw around biracial children was 1%. 1% of babies were considered biracial. You fast forward today to 2020, that number is upwards of 33.8 million, or roughly 10% of the populace. That would mean you're beginning to develop critical mass of people who share maybe not a community or a culture, but they share a common identity. They may not share a community or a culture, but they share a common heritage configuration. All right. When it was just 1%, that was irrelevant, right? Those were just highly marginalized, very small numbers, particularly when you break it down by geography. I was a West Coast kid. My dad was in the military. And so I moved and interacted in very small circles of typically Black GIs married to international or foreign women. And then we were the offspring of that in very small percentages and numbers. But you fast forward today, 10%, particularly of some 350 million people in the United States of America, that becomes a critical mass. That is a critical mass. The third designation is that just a blip? Is there a downward trend, or will that continue to grow? All data suggests that there are more and more interracial marriages that are occurring, meaning there's going to be more and more mixed babies of all different kinds of cultural, monoracial, multi-generationally mixed kinds of parents. And so if you look at today's dynamic, about 10% of marriages are interracial. And if you look at newlyweds, as of 2015, 17% of all new marriages were interracial. If we do the math on that, beautiful folks, that means the interracial marriage rate is going to continue to go up. That is fodder for conversation on some other channels. I'm just articulating data, and they are going to produce babies. And that means the 10%, 33.8 million of biracial children or human beings today will likely go up and up and up exponentially. All right. The fourth criteria is, are they studied? Is there scholarship that tells a certain kind of academic perspective, a data perspective, an empirical perspective about mixed race identity, about biracial identity? The first, the ability to extrapolate that is usually through the U.S. Census. The Pew Research does a lot of research in the space of multiracial identity, biracial identity, and then that becomes opportunities for scholarship, for people and academicians to take raw data sets and then to tell a story, to study it, to extrapolate the data, to break it down, to have test groups, control groups, whatever the case may be, to do that academic thing, and then to tell a story. It's important to understand factual stories about your people, because that becomes the means by which you can stratify, see where inequity rests, see where a significant accomplishment has been made. But more importantly, the act of culture is to direct action towards your cultural improvement. You cannot direct action to improvement if you don't know the data. And so more and more articles are coming out that are focused specifically on America's continuing growth in the space of biracial or multiracial. Let me pause there and say good evening, beautiful people. Thank you guys for listening in. If this conversation or content so far has some appeal to you, some value, introducing you to some things, throw something in the box so I know you're there. I can see some numbers on the screen, but I'd love to have some energy. All right. The fifth criteria would be what I'll call sort of a breaking ties, or a tension between, or a welcoming mat being sullied. To say it more poignantly, the cultural home for most biracial kids historically has been within the Black monoracial group. And that made sense, I believe, all the way up into the modern era, which I call the 1960s, the decades. Prior to that, you had a different kind of dynamic as it related to interracial marriages, to include illegalness. And post 60 and all the legislation and Loving case and civil rights legislation and affirming the 14th Amendment and protection of class and those kind of things, you dawned a new modern era as it relates to the biracial space. I was at the infancy of that, but you fast forward some 50 plus years later, and you have a different kind of connection or relationship with the broader monoracial Black community. And young people today are sharing with me, it wasn't my life lived, at least en masse or in a critical way, that the gatekeeping dynamic that has historically been left to youth who are managing and creating hierarchy in space, that it has become increasingly more challenging and difficult to sustain membership as a biracial person in Black spaces. I'm broadly generalizing here. I know that for every case that might be an articulation of that, there's countless other cases where it's not. But this dynamic of gatekeeping and the inability to surpass the gate, I think the percentages of that is probably much higher today than it was back in my day, in part because there was no alternative. There was no alternative multiracial space to seek membership in. So you just had to keep digging, fighting, compromising, making whatever kind of thing just to hold your own within Black spaces as biracial kids. It was either that, or it was either isolate or completely not deny, but completely, settle or set back any cultural identity and just find other ways to find community and social groups. So there's an increasing nuance in terms of biracial connection to monoracial black and vice versa. And both folks are sort of giving each other the best they got. All right. The other piece is visibility, increased visibility of biracial groups in common spaces, in popular culture. We're seeing that across multiple entertainment sectors, much more perhaps than in the past. There's a certain kind of palatability and acceptability that this sort of signals to the biracial community, that the broader society, the gatekeepers of the broader society, are actually making opportunities for more entry of people who sort of fit a certain kind of aesthetic. There's a lot of conversation to be had there, but the fact that more and more biracial folks are showing up in public spaces, TV, commercials, sports, entertainment, suggests something new, right? Suggests something new. And then finally, one of the other criteria is the historical glue that bonded blackness together with each decade and generation that moves forward. That glue currently constantly rearranges itself. And biracial kids, we often had clarity about what the movement was, what the activism was, and one of the ways in which we legitimized ourselves in monoracial spaces is that we became activists, we became leaders, we became organizers, but as along with monoracial black leaders and organizers and activists. But that was a pathway to negate color and to be relevant and to bring value to the community. But as the community gets further and further away from rigid racialized law, the culture itself is in a constant experience of redefinition, redefining, and in this monoracial redefining, biracial kids are not as clear as to what the pathway is into a blackness, what that looks like, what role there is to play. And in absence of clarity, it opens up this other opportunity for considerations. The other criteria, the one that's perhaps the most difficult, are their traditions. Are there traditions that are unique to biracial? That would be a criteria, I think, for ultimate cultural affirmation. It's probably one of the most challenges because of the variety of diversity within biracial mixed race space. But traditions are something that are practiced internally. If there is ever a broad conference or coming together where folks are talking about cultural formation of biracial identity, a lot of time would need to be spent on traditions, because I think they're the hardest. They're the hardest in a modern era. Most traditions come in reaction to historical confrontation, in terms of historical resiliency or solution setting. And so the current biracial formation does not have that at large, so it would need to think about traditions. But any cultural community, at least loosely, will need to have some form of cultural traditions. And then the last one, the ninth one, is celebration. Traditions are internal, celebrations are outward. What are the opportunities for the community to come together on some annual basis to celebrate, to have fun, to party, to listen to music, but to gather and come together in a celebratory fashion that celebrates, praises, and uplifts a particular kind of culture in a particular kind of unique way. So those were the initial 9 criteria. So I want to pause there and do a check-in, see if everybody's okay. Mulatto, I don't know if you're still there. So now I want to explore with you all if there is a 10th criteria. A lot of this stuff exists in some levels. A lot of it is aspirational, but it typically is referenced with the biracial community or persons in mind. But is there a third audience? Does a part of identity formation take a cue, take a hint, take a lesson from things outside of itself, right? Things outside of itself. Is there something to be learned or understood by not how only you perceive yourself, but also how others perceive you? Now, in the space of perception, especially group perceptions of other groups, inherently you'll get into stereotypes. Are there unique stereotypes for Black and white biracial kids? And if there is, what does that say about identity? So in the study, again, not quite monoracial, biracial stereotypes explored, from the Bulletin Personality and Social Psychology, they said that there is differences. The study featured 1,104 Americans. Participants were overwhelmingly white, 71%, and relatively young with a mean age of 33. One of the first things that they discovered is this. A lot of stereotypes of black, white, biracial people were completely different from the ones people have about white people and black people. Let me say that again. A lot of stereotypes of black, white, biracial were completely different from the ones people have about white people and black people. In essence, in most instances, people see black and white children as representing the cultures of their parents. But as we've talked about before, here you have a situation where you have stereotypes unique to biracial kids that are distinctively different than white and black stereotypes. All right? Distinctively different than white and black stereotypes. Let me come back up here. This would suggest, the research went into the study suspecting that black, white, biracial Americans would widely be categorized as black. The researchers, through their own articulation, went into the study suspecting that black, white, biracial Americans would be categorized as black, meaning the stereotypes of black monoracial people would be largely the same stereotypes of biracial kids. This is what the researchers said. But the data showed that these biracial Americans had an equivalent number of stereotypes in common with white individuals and black individuals. They had an equivalent number of stereotypes in common with white individuals and black individuals, meaning they had their own set of stereotypes, but they had stereotypes that overlap with whiteness and blackness. The stereotypes for whiteness are vastly different from blackness. Black stereotypes were vastly different from those of whiteness, but biracial kids understandably had a little bit of stereotype associated with both, and they had their own stereotypes that were not associated with the monoracial black-white perspective. This is suggesting something new. This is suggesting something new, a new interpretation, a new way of seeing a group of people based upon how they present. And those cultural presentations are then stereotyped, and the stereotypes for biracial black-white kids were different, unique than just white and black, and they also had some commonality. All right, so this is suggesting that people might actually think of biracial people as their own racial group, rather than just a combination of their parents' racial group. This is suggesting that an external culture, upon examination of other cultures, sees biracial people not as simply this configuration of two different cultures, but as their own distinctive group, i.e. measured as stereotypes. All people look at other cultural groups and they stereotype. If you take the stereotype and that informs prejudice, and then you act on the prejudice to the form of discrimination, then you're in racism, then you're in discrimination. But initially, stereotypes exist across all groups. It's what you do with them. Do you generalize them? Do you activate upon them? Do you make blanket assumptions about them? But the fact that groups look at groups and have stereotypes about them, that's a part of human nature. We elevate upon that base nature is when we don't act upon it and we realize that these stereotypes might have kernels of truth, but cannot be laid en masse upon an entire group of people. However, to have a white stereotype and a black stereotype, and as the data here is suggesting, a biracial stereotype would suggest, at least from an external cultural evaluation, that biracial kids are seen as their own distinct group. So you have this movement. You have this movement of biracial young people who are saying we are our own group. You have some tension in the historical cultural home, that a black home that has occurred. I'm talking about cultural home. And if you look outwardly, and folks are self-examining biracial from afar, they have their own unique stereotypes. That is very interesting because it suggests that people might actually think of biracial people as their own racial group. So if a community of people are arguing for their own cultural distinctive identity group, while they may not assert this as a criteria, it is certainly interesting that a part of their journey into a cultural independence would not have to overcome the hurdle of external perception of it. Now, I'm not saying your identity requires external validation. I'm just suggesting that in this study, this review of the study, they're saying biracialness has its own stereotypes, and it's a crazy way to articulate distinction, but Blackness had a category of stereotypes, whiteness has categories of stereotypes, biracial kids have their own unique stereotypes that are both in both groups but also unto themselves. That is very, very interesting. The stereotype that tends to be most associated with biracial kids, mixed kids, to include black, white, is appearance and a sense of not belonging. Appearance and a sense of not belonging. Appearance and a sense of not belonging. This is interesting. Not belonging, I certainly can understand. There's certainly association with appearance as it comes to biracial, this sort of newness, this configuration of diversity. I don't know if biracial folks are more attractive on par than average. There's beautiful folk in all communities. Yes, there are. But this dynamic of not belonging, as someone who went through a transition where I had to pick a cultural pathway, I can certainly understand that. The stereotype itself is not as interesting to me as to the dynamic of being seen distinctively as a separate group. I hadn't thought about that, but I think it would make a case for not a rigid rejection of monoracial black membership, but certainly to sort of tip one's hat towards the evolving dynamic of demographics and cultural nuance and flow, that the space is opening up more and more and more for biracial cultural identity assertion. But is it a new criteria? I would say no. I would say it is not a criteria in my musings as to what it would take for a biracial community to become its own cultural community. I would simply say it's an indicator. It's an indicator that these things, along with a host of others I'm sure I'm missing, are in place and would sort of suggest, as I'm thinking and if you were to ask me, I do think as the numbers continue to grow and more interracial families begin and raise children to the point to where the numbers would suggest at least some independent celebration, at least some conclusion that comes from scholarship. You're going to see increased visibility, and you're going to see increased gathering across all sectors, not just social sectors, but intellectual, professional, governance, and where the conversation of biracial identity will be one that is taken a bit more serious, given a bit more priority, both from health, educational patterns, wealth accumulation, all kinds of variables that we can extrapolate from the U.S. Census. And similarly to the stereotype study, you'll find very commonality with monoracial issues, but there will also emerge some distinct narratives, data sets that are unique to particular heritage configurations. This can have implication on a number of things, but the more important dynamic is that more and more young people are acknowledging both love sources in ways that were not consistent with my generation, and more importantly to the sentiment of the page. How do you raise them? How do you raise them in a way that represents both their beautiful blackness, that represents their beautiful whiteness, or whatever the mixed configuration is, but also undeniably acknowledges that they do not share the same cultural heritage and i.e. experiences that you had growing up in a black world or a white world, that theirs is a combination of the two, and that needs some consideration when you're thinking about raising them to be grounded, healthy, rooted, solid, ultimately independent, beautiful sons and daughters who have the highest regard for themselves, have the highest sense of esteem for themselves, because that is critically important for when they raise children, They have the kind of confidence, aptitude, and skill set to ensure that generationally we are all moving towards what cultures do. Cultures live beautiful individual lives. They're determined to assist communities that they come from, and they solve their cultural problems. They solve their cultural problems. Black folks ought to look at data sets. That was my coming of age problems. I chose to focus in on education and breaking the cycle of first generation among the Black community. That gave me purpose and clarity. But as biracial kids look at data sets, they might find some variables that are unique to them that they then get passion and build cultural acts around. But all individuals need to take care of personal business, and should they be culturally oriented, the action of culture is to solve your problems. The only way you can solve them is if you understand them. All right, let me pause there, see if there's any questions. We're at about the 30-minute mark. We got a couple folks in here. This will be the time to pose your questions, disagreements, challenges. Where are my gap areas? What do I need to be mindful of? Again, I'm a biracial kid by birth. I'm living a Black cultural life aesthetically, although I know how light-skinned I am. I'm not delusional about that. But I acknowledge today's generation, and not just for fodder, is dealing with a different kind of reality for a number of these criteria. And outwardly, people are looking at them as something both and distinct, something unique and both. All right. Just to be consistent with what I said I'm going to do, I'm going to put this invite up here. Mulatto, what do you think if you're there? What do you think? Stereotypes, is that a criteria, or is it an indicator, or is this common sense, simplistic stuff? I see y'all looking in. I definitely want to get some feedback here. You guys have been real solid. I did a short yesterday talking about puberty. I do some stuff on culture at times, but a lot of it is just parent focused. And I was feeling a little, just in a YouTube funk. Hadn't posted in a while, but I did a short. Had 2 people when I went to sleep. When I woke up, it had 574 views and 2 new subscriptions. So if you guys are YouTubers, I understand that sometimes you get sort of deflated and kind of wondering what's going on. But be persistent. If you have over 500, you can do posts. I think you can do shorts regardless of the number, but it doesn't always have to be these long kind of live streams or videos. Sometimes just connect with your audience in short kind of ways. And at least for me, it seems to be working. I think I've gotten a handful of subscribers via the shorts, but you're also reaching a mass audience that historically may not, or randomly may not come across your page. And YouTube is definitely trying to push shorts because TikTok is a form of shorts, and TikTok is giving them a run for their money. All right. So let me see if we have any comments, questions. All right. I'm going to get ready to wrap. So this is what we need, beautiful family. If you find value in the content, tell somebody about it. If you are a newly interracial couple and you guys are raising kids and you want to chop it up, this is a space to do it. Or if you want to reach out to me on an individual level and we can conversate about it in a more private kind of setting, I'd love to do that, be available to you. This is a fun kind of thing for me, and I'm looking for more perspectives. If there's some subject matter that you're interested in me exploring that's kind of within my wheelhouse and space, feel free to send me an email. I don't confess expertise. I simply profess life lived. I'm 54 years old. I have 6 beautiful children who are biracially presenting, although their mother is Black. But it's just fascinating. They themselves sort of lean Black, in part because that's how we raise them, which goes to suggest at least where your children land culturally in their formative years, their formation years, is tied to how parents move them. If you're a parent and you want to move your kids to acknowledge the beauty of both love sources, you have to be intentional about that. If you are going to raise them to be one culture the other way, how do you do that, right? But membership in a cultural group, or in its macro sense, a social group, requires intentionality in both what you expose them to, what the dinner table conversations are like, what it is that you want to prioritize for them, how you leverage the village, mama's side, daddy's side. And it's much more acceptable and opportunistic in the modern era to do that as a biracial identity beyond just declaration. What does it mean? What's its substance, right? Mulatto, who is also a content creator, says shorts are great. They get pushed into the algorithm, right? There are specific stereotypes for biracial people, right? Interestingly, Mulatto, I didn't see the entire study. I just reviewed the review of the study. It didn't mention some of the stereotypes that the young people are talking about, and I wonder if that's because the audience was largely white. They were largely white people who were in the survey or participated in the study, and young, 33. And so some of the other stereotypes associated with biracialness didn't seem to come across. Does not mean they're not true, but the dynamic still remains that stereotypes that biracial kids have are distinct unto themselves, with some overlap of both groups, suggesting, at least outwardly, they're seen as a distinct group, which means the birthing, the nuance of an emergent culture that is biracial, as loose as that is, as convoluted and complex as that is, there's evidence to suggest that it's leaning and trickling that way. Mulatto, what's good, brother?
Hey,
Mulatto, how you doing? Can you
hey brother, how you doing? Can you hear?
Yep, I can hear you. How you doing today? What's going on?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good. Thank you for bringing me up.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to make a kind of brief comment as far as what you have up there, as far as the stereotype. So there are a lot of stereotypes that are placed onto biracial people. One of the most prevailing ones is the whole split personality component.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people, and they'll also use a specific term, which I consider a slur at this moment. They say confused.
Yeah.
They'll put the label of confused onto the biracial individual. So those are kind of stereotypes kind of associated with that.
Yeah, I would certainly agree. One can just look at the journey of biracial kids through their own articulation or, group observation and realize there's this duality. And it takes a certain sophistication to live in both comfortably, or to, move into just one group. And then there's an element of denial of the other love source. And so confusion can be sort of associated with that. But, from the study, it mentions the belonging sense, and maybe you can extrapolate the confusion piece out of that if you were to dig down and nuance it a bit more. But to the broader point, if a group is seen as part of a monoracial, then its stereotypes would be largely associated with the monolithic, with the monoracial community. The fact that it has its own distinct stereotypes, it's an interesting measure, but it would suggest that at least an external entity sees it as something distinct. And so if one's making an argument for distinction, again, not vicious ripping apart, but one way in which a community understands itself is to understand how it's seen by sort of third party or other kinds of cultures. So you being an advocate of sort of a unique culture, this would suggest that you're not just speculating or just musing or just asserting, that you're picking up on a current wave of an emergent culture, if that makes sense.
Yeah, most definitely. Your broadcast has been excellent this evening, so thank you for hosting this. I'm definitely going to go back and review a lot of this stuff. This is great material. What I wanted to add as far as the stereotype component is there's also another prevailing stereotype, which is definitely pushed majority by the monoracial Black women. Well, they will literally state that biracial people with Black moms are superior to than the biracial people with white moms. And the reason why they push this myth is because they feel like that child will be enculturated into Blackness better, which obviously your presence, you basically kind of, I guess you can say, tarnish that whole myth. because you are definitely culturally centered more in your blackness, right? Which there's a lot of people who are, like Barack Obama is a great example. There's others as well, but this is a generational nuance kind of thing, because I definitely hear this with younger people, younger monoracial black people who push this myth that, you know, the biracial with a black mom is better fit into black society because they're more culturally grounded to blackness. That's a prevailing stereotype, when you know the majority of biracial people in America, black, white, biracial, they have black fathers and white mothers.
Right.
So they're essentially pushing out, like, or labeling the majority of us is like, you know, and they also, there's another term they use, they call it like a pathology of being biracial. I'm going to cover some of these things in a broadcast pretty soon, because a lot of these things have been kind of popping up on, you know, TikTok, which is a major source, and then also like the YouTube space. But yeah.
Yeah. You know, it sounds like the argument of the mothers are the transmitters of culture, and you know, in monoracial communities, I would certainly echo that. But as you talked about, in a postmodern biracial era, you know, you go from pre-60s, where most biracial situations had white fathers, to where now it's black fathers. So the proportionality of black mothers with white husbands producing biracial child would be a much smaller percentage than the inverse. And given, you know, human growth and development, culture can be transmitted, you know, in different kind of ways. But then there's also, I imagine, a certain kind of uncertainty, maybe on the part of white mothers who are married to black men, when it comes to the cultural development piece. And so there's probably a yielding in some instances to the black person, or in this case a black father, when it comes to transmitting or teaching culture. And I'm sure that's also nuanced by daughters and sons. But yeah, stereotypes prevail. Those are examples of it. But it underscores the importance for conversation, and I think it underscores the emerging of an important conversation about how biracial transitions into its own cultural self, in a way that bridges with blackness. That's my constant refrain. But also is a new opportunity for interracial couples to think about how they raise their children, that it does not have to lean one way. It can, but can lean both ways and uplift both. Or if the choice is to orient the kid white, you know, there's still a dynamic tied to that. But I think this is a part of the scholarship piece of the criteria, is just having conversations and opening the door in not rigid racialized ways about the emerging biracial community and how to best support children in their coming of age process. Mulatto, I appreciate your insight and broadening the conversation always.
Definitely, most definitely. Do you mind if I ask one more question before I go?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, so you mentioned something about the gatekeeping component. So the thing is like you said, typically within your peer group as children, there's a lot of the gatekeeping. But what I found is that gatekeeping component in today's era, it goes through into adulthood as well. So even if in the you know, I experienced it at the university level.
The gatekeeping element?
So at the college and the university I attended. So it goes, yeah.
Brother,
I know I'm not the only person.
Yep. You know, I tend to operate under a model, and it might be antiquated, that your struggles, your growth, your coming of age has a time frame on it, right? You know, I talk extensively about puberty, the warrior class, the stages of human development. And then there's probably a problematic lack of sophistication to believe that development occurs, and then the antics and angst that comes with development, you know, dissipates as one gets older and locks in on life. So that's why it's important for me to have my ear to the YouTube streets and to the public square, so I can hear the voices of all generations. The fact that this even kind of parlays or spills over into young adulthood beyond the 20s is fascinating to me. But it also lets us know that this isn't just youthful antics. It isn't just youthful challenge, right? There's something rooted in this tension point in some instances between on a spectrum of color. as I mentioned, as we've got further and further away from rigid racialized law that required activism, strategy, political engagement, protests, the further and further you get away from that, the less glue that the cultural community has. And one of the things that people do when they don't have high level prioritization, they get into the weeds of distraction, and oftentimes that becomes in group fighting in some macro kind of way. The tension between upon color lines is a new question, in part because the historical agenda and priority of blackness has shifted from harmony and pages of unity where black and light-skinned folks could work together. As you get further and further away from that, you have not just young people, as you're articulating, that are dealing with some of this in historical in-group fighting. It's interesting, but it also makes the question of an intentional pathway into a unique new identity one of high curiosity, but one that warrants a bit some serious consideration.
Perfectly stated. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Mulatto, thank you so much for popping in. I always appreciate your support. Good luck on what you're doing. Thank you, Mulatto. All right, beautiful family. If there's any other questions or someone wants to get in, I know Mulatto, but if you come in, I will ask for you to show me your face, your grill, your prettiness, your handsomeness, whatever the case may be, and then we can talk a little bit, or otherwise we can take a question here in the box, should there be any. Again, J4 Conversation is primarily a parenting page. The four of us were two fathers and two sons, initially chopping it up about competencies, particularly what 18-year-olds who are at the legal age of independence should think about and know as they move through the world as contributing, grounded, independent young men. And then Gene and I just did a random one day on our coming of age process as biracial kids born in 68 and 1970. And then that got a lot of interest and enlightened me in a very open your eye kind of way that biracial folks are moving and engaging in different ways than I'd historically been attuned to. And as you should, YouTube content providers, if something pops in your space, you got to feed it. I'm YouTube pimping, y'all. I'm YouTube pimping in the biracial space. That seemed to be of interest to the people. I did a little bit of studying and research, and I said I can understand why. 10% of the population is biracial. 17% of interracial marriages for newlyweds. It's 17%. That means it's growing. And I know there's white mothers listening in right now, married or single moms, shout out to you, that are wondering, how do you raise that beautiful child in front of you? The one that has a different color tone, a different phenotype, the one that's managing loving home resources, but they go out into the societal streets and they got questions and they're asking you what's going on. There's hair care, there's cultural competencies, there's how do you move, how do you dress, how do you play with language, how do you play with symbols of culture, and what does that mean to mama? Where's your sense of self? How comfortable are you? It's one thing to marry, a human being in front of you of a particular race that you love. I can dig that. But it's another thing to birth and nurture and be the primary, parents being the primary person to help raise these babies. And for the most, that'll be just simply raising children, understanding age development and what you need to do. But there's an added nuances because this beautiful seed in front of you does not share your culture. All the cultural questions that you dealt with, if you dealt with them in whiteness, that natural cachet, that life lived, that is not something that you'll be able to pull from robustly when you're trying to help your beautiful biracial kid navigate their duality, often in monoracial spaces. So with that note, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you guys for riding with me. Check out the next video. If there's interest into you, check it out. Our goal today is 4 subscribers. For people who have not subscribed but are new to the channel, welcome. And thank you guys for liking, for commenting. On behalf of J4 Conversations, see you next time. Love, love, love.